you ever wondered why people get addicted to things that slowly destroy them? Why someone would keep returning to a habit that empties them, even when they know it's killing them? We like to pretend the answer is simple: willpower, self-control, choice. We say things like, they just need to stop. But this explanation barely scratches the surface, because beneath every addiction, whether it's to alcohol, gambling, social media, or even toxic relationships, there's a much deeper truth, a hunger, a spiritual wound, a silent, unanswered question: why am I alive? This isn't a video about substances. This is about the soul, about the part of you that quietly breaks under the weight of modern life, and how addiction often emerges not from a love of pleasure, but from the absence of meaning. Let's be clear, addiction is not always about a chemical hook. It's not always about trauma, either. Sometimes it's about absence, an emptiness that has no name, a craving for something real in a world that constantly offers illusions. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "The greatest despair is to not know that one is in despair," and that is the reality for many addicts. They are not drowning in substances, they are drowning in a world that has forgotten how to nourish the soul. From the outside, it's easy to label an addict as irresponsible, selfish, weak. But what if we've misunderstood what addiction really is? What if the addict isn't chasing a high but running from a void? Think about it. Why would someone choose to destroy themselves slowly? Maybe they're not choosing destruction. Maybe destruction feels safer than staring into the abyss of meaninglessness. Maybe the pain is the only thing that still makes them feel alive. Because when you have no purpose, no guiding philosophy, no connection to something deeper, anything that numbs the silence can feel like salvation. Addiction is not a failure of morality. It is a crisis of being. A cry for wholeness in a fractured world. Philosopher Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, believed that the fundamental human drive isn't pleasure, it's meaning. And when we don't find meaning, we don't become neutral, we become lost. We grasp for something, anything, that gives us a sense of control, even if it's poison. That's why people stay addicted, because it works, until it doesn't. Because that drink, that scroll, that binge, that risky behavior, it feels like connection, it feels like peace. It offers an illusion of wholeness, even if it's temporary. But the soul knows. The soul always knows when you're feeding it lies. And here's the irony: the person who becomes addicted is often not the weakest. They might actually be the most sensitive, the most honest, the one who can't tolerate the noise of an inauthentic life. Addiction then is not the disease, it's the symptom. It's what happens when the body cannot carry the weight of spiritual hunger any longer. So how do we begin to heal? The answer isn't discipline, it's not punishment, it's not shame. The answer begins with truth, with looking honestly at the life you're living and asking, is this me? Am I living in alignment with who I am? Carl Jung once said that every addiction is an attempt to return to the self, not the ego, not the mask, but the true self, the part of you that remembers. But to return to the self, you must go through the fire. You must face the shadow, the pain, the rage, the sorrow you've buried for years. You must ask the questions you've been avoiding. Why do I feel so empty? Why do I feel so alone? When did I lose myself? And this is terrifying, because the moment you take away the addiction, all that's left is you, unfiltered, unnumbed, real. But it's also the beginning of rebirth. The ancient Stoics believed that the path to freedom wasn't in escaping suffering, but in giving it meaning. Marcus Aurelius didn't ask for peace. He asked for strength to endure the storm, and maybe that's what recovery really is. Not the absence of struggle, but the reclaiming of dignity. The addict doesn't need to be saved. They need to remember who they are. Because here's the truth: addiction is never just about the thing. It's about the feeling underneath it. The longing to belong, the need to feel safe, the desire to escape a life that feels unbearable. What the addict truly needs is not a pill or a program. They need philosophy. They need myth. They need a new story to tell themselves about who they are. And yet, most of the world offers none of this. Just platitudes, just rules, just judgment. So the addict returns to what they know, because false peace is still better than no peace at all. But if you're listening to this, and you recognize yourself, know this: you are not broken. You are searching. You are not too far gone. You are on a journey back home. The pain you feel is not meaningless. It is the sign that something inside you still refuses to go numb, and that part of you, that ache, is sacred. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow, but why doesn't come from the world. It comes from within, from the quiet voice inside that says, 'I was meant for more than this.' Healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You will return to the same lessons again and again, but each time you'll understand them more deeply. And one day you may look back and realize, the addiction wasn't the enemy, it was the messenger. It was your soul's way of saying, 'Wake up, there is more to life than this.' So don't silence the ache. Don't numb the hunger. Let it guide you. Let it lead you to the place you forgot existed, the place where meaning lives, the place where you remember not who you were told to be, but who you truly are. The addict is not lost. They are on the edge of revelation. The only question is, are you ready to listen? But what happens after the awakening? After that first crack in the illusion, here's the uncomfortable truth. The real work begins after the epiphany. It's easy to have a moment of clarity, a sudden realization that your life can't go on this way, that the addiction, the scrolling, the self-sabotage, it's a mask, a lie, a way of avoiding something buried deep inside. But clarity without action is just another form of self-deception, because after the insight comes the void. That space where your old coping mechanism is gone, but nothing has taken its place yet. And that is where most people relapse. Not because they're weak, but because they're alone with themselves, with nothing to hold on to but silence. And silence can be deafening when you've lived your life trying to escape it. This is where philosophy becomes more than theory. It becomes medicine, structure, a form of inner architecture. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal every morning, he wasn't trying to be profound. He was reminding himself not to fall apart. He was reminding himself that there is a difference between what happens to us and how we interpret it, that we are not our urges, not our past, not even our pain. We are, instead, the observer, the one who can choose how to respond. But here's the problem. In today's world, no one teaches us how to observe ourselves. We're taught how to perform, how to conform, how to produce. But introspection, stillness, spiritual grounding, these are seen as luxuries, optional, even suspicious. So we drift, we perform wellness, we buy things, we follow trends, we post affirmations, but nothing sticks, because nothing reaches the part of us that is actually wounded. Addiction is not healed through optimization. It's healed through integration, through the courage to sit with the broken parts of yourself and not flinch. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or disown, because we were taught they were unlovable. But until we face the shadow, we remain its prisoner. We'll keep returning to addiction, not because we're evil or doomed, but because we are incomplete, and the soul will not rest until it becomes whole again. This is why recovery is not about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about becoming a truer version. One that no longer needs to hide behind numbing, avoiding, or pleasing. Because here's the paradox: what you think you need to get rid of, your pain, your sadness, your cravings, may be the exact doorway into your awakening. The poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And while it's a beautiful idea, living it is messy. It means grief. It means sitting with the younger version of yourself who was never held. It means confronting the reality that your addiction might have been the only way you knew how to survive. But survival is not living, and you were meant for more than just survival. You were meant to choose your life, to move from unconscious reaction to conscious response, to take your suffering and sculpt it into something sacred. That's the path of the philosopher, not to escape pain, but to transform it into wisdom. But let's not romanticize the process. There will be days when you want to run back, when you crave the numbness more than you crave truth, when you long for the simplicity of ignorance, and that's okay. The recovery of the soul is not linear, it's a spiral. You will revisit the same wounds, the same temptations, but each time, you'll return with more insight, more self-compassion, more strength, and slowly you begin to build something real, a foundation not based on distraction, but on meaning. You find rituals that ground you, relationships that nourish you, work that aligns with your values, silence that no longer feels like a threat, but a return. You begin to see beauty again. In the small things, the sky after rain, a sincere conversation, the sound of your own breath when you're not in a hurry. You begin to see that joy is not found in the extremes, but in the depth of presence. And that's when you know you're healing, not because your cravings disappear, but because you stop believing they're your only option. You realize that the part of you that reached for addiction wasn't broken. It was trying to protect you, trying to give you something when the world gave you nothing. And now, with gentleness, you can say, thank you, but I'm ready to walk a different path now. A path where you are not numbed, not consumed, not owned, but free. Free to feel deeply, to love authentically, to suffer meaningfully, to be a human being, not a machine for productivity or pleasure, but a vessel for awareness. This is what the ancient philosophers meant when they spoke of liberation, not escaping the body or transcending the world, but becoming present in it, fully. Addiction is not a detour from the path, it is the path, if you are willing to listen, because the same fire that once burned you can now light your way home. So if you're in that space between addiction and awakening, don't rush, don't force, just stay. Stay with the silence, stay with the ache, stay with the question, what is this trying to teach me? And slowly, a new voice will emerge, not the voice of judgment, not the voice of shame, but the voice of the self, the one that has been waiting all along. But even as we begin to heal alone, there comes a moment when we realize we can't do it only alone. Addiction isolates. By its nature, it creates a private prison, silent, invisible, carefully guarded. We build it ourselves, brick by brick, out of fear, out of shame, out of the belief that no one else could understand the weight we carry. But healing, that's something else entirely. Healing requires contact, connection, not just with ideas or books or even with our inner self, but with other people, not perfect people, not enlightened ones, just people who are also doing the work. People who are willing to sit with your pain without trying to fix it, because sometimes all we need is someone to witness us, without judgment. This is why ancient philosophy was never just a solitary pursuit. The Stoics wrote letters to each other. Socrates asked questions in the public square. Buddhist monks practiced in sanghas. Spiritual seekers formed communities, not because they were weak, but because they understood something our modern world has forgotten. The soul is relational. It thrives not in isolation, but in resonance. And yet, community alone is not enough. What we also need desperately is ritual. We live in an age that worships spontaneity and freedom, but too much freedom can be its own kind of trap. Without rhythm, we get lost. Without structure, our emotions can devour us. This is why monks wake up at the same time every day, why the Stoics journaled every morning, why indigenous cultures danced, fasted, and sat in stillness before big life transitions. Not because they were primitive, but because they were wise. Ritual creates sacred space. It teaches the body again and again that there is a way through the chaos, that even in suffering, there can be rhythm. Even in emptiness, there can be meaning. When you rise each morning and choose to breathe before you scroll, that's a ritual. When you take 5 minutes to write down your fears instead of numbing them, that's a ritual. When you meet a friend once a week, just to speak honestly, that's a ritual. These small acts are not trivial. They're your resistance against distraction, against despair, against the algorithm that feeds on your attention and your confusion. They're the bricks of your new temple, a place not made of stone but of intention. Because healing is not just about stopping the addiction, it's about building a life where you no longer need it. And that's the most terrifying part. Because the truth is, addiction isn't just a chemical imbalance or a bad habit or a character flaw. Addiction is often a response to a life that lacks depth. We drink, scroll, eat, binge, escape, because somewhere deep down, we've lost touch with the sacred. Not religion necessarily, but the feeling that this life, this moment, is worth being fully awake for. And regaining that feeling requires something radical, a shift in perception. The mystics spoke of this, so did Nietzsche, so did Viktor Frankl. That life's meaning is not handed to us. We must create it, forge it, wrestle with it. And this is where philosophy becomes more than a lifeline. It becomes a forge. Because meaning isn't something we find like a coin on the street. It's something we build like a fire, with friction, with effort, with patience. And in that process, something strange happens. The very thing that once enslaved you, your addiction, becomes a source of insight. You begin to understand why you ran, why you needed the high, and why you feared the silence. And in that understanding, you reclaim your power. You realize your story does not have to end with recovery. It can begin there. Because beyond recovery is creation, the power to rebuild your mind, to rewire your beliefs, to realign your energy. And the most beautiful part, you don't need to be fully healed to start. You just need to begin, to return to the body, to make space for stillness, to take a single breath before you react, to remember that each moment is a portal, and each choice is a vote for the future self you're becoming. That self is not perfect, but it is whole. Not in the sense of being complete, but in the sense of being integrated, awake, rooted. It's the version of you that doesn't run from pain, but listens to it, that doesn't fear freedom but honors it with discipline. Because here's the final paradox. Freedom without structure is just chaos. We think we want total liberty, no limits, no rule. But what we actually crave, what the soul craves, is meaningful constraint, a path, a way. When the Buddha left his palace, he didn't find freedom in indulgence. He found it in the middle path, in balance, in mindfulness, in presence. When Epictetus was enslaved, he still believed he was free, because no one could enslave his mind. And that is the final lesson. Addiction may bind the body, it may cloud the thoughts, but it can never fully extinguish the inner spark, the part of you that remains untouched, waiting for you to stop numbing, waiting for you to stop fleeing, waiting for you to come home. Home, not as a place, but as a state of being, a state where you don't need to escape yourself, because you've made peace with who you are, a state where presence becomes your refuge, where truth becomes your practice, where love, real, grounded, sober love, becomes your compass. There's one last illusion we must confront. The idea that healing is linear, that once you stop the addiction or break the pattern or begin to wake up, the road forward is smooth, upward, predictable. It isn't. Healing is not a ladder. It's a spiral. You will come back to the same feelings, the same cravings, the same questions, but each time you'll meet them from a slightly different place. You'll relapse, not just in behavior, but in thought. You'll catch yourself fantasizing again about the old escape, the numbness, the heart. And in those moments you might feel like you've failed, but you haven't, because now you're aware, you see the pattern. You recognize the voice that says, just once more, or what's the point? You may still feel its pull, but it no longer owns you. That is growth, not perfection, not immunity, but awareness. And from that awareness comes something even more important: forgiveness. Not just toward others, but toward yourself. Because when you're in the depths of addiction or self-destruction, what you often carry isn't just pain. It's guilt. The feeling that you should have known better, that you wasted time, that you ruined something unfixable. But guilt is just another form of attachment to the past, to a version of you that didn't yet have the tool. And here is the truth. No one teaches us. You were doing the best you could with the consciousness you had at the time. That doesn't excuse everything, but it explains everything. And understanding that is the beginning of mercy. Philosophy speaks of time not just as a clock or a calendar, but as kairos, sacred time. The right moment, the inner turning point. And maybe now this is your kairos, not because everything is perfect, but because you are finally ready to begin again, ready to return to your breath, to the page, to the mirror, to the world, ready to live not as a prisoner of your history, but as the author of your present. And that doesn't mean you'll never fall again. It just means you know how to stand back up with grace. Because the goal is not to become someone else, it's to become yourself, fully, fiercely, gently, to walk into the fire of your past, and come out not unscathed but transformed, wiser, softer, stronger, and maybe someday someone will come to you with their own pain, and you will listen, not with advice, not with pity, but with presence, because you will know what it's like to drown, and to come back breathing. And in that moment, you'll realize something that philosophy and recovery have always known. The greatest gift you can offer the world is your own healed presence.